Back to the Future Part 2. The film that asked, what if we made a sequel that is not only bigger than the first, but essentially 3 movies stitched together with the manic energy of Doc Brown after too much Pepsi-Free? Released in 1989, this second chapter in the time-hopping saga dared to leap boldly into the far-flung world of 2015. A glittering techno-fantasy of flying cars, sky-high highways, self-drying jackets, and more neon than a Vegas buffet sign. But the movie is far more than its hoverboards and holographic sharks. It's an ambitious chronicle of timelines gone wrong, the butterfly effect disaster that ensues when a sports almanac falls into the wrong hands, and the sort of family dysfunction that can only be solved by time travel and a good pep talk from your future self. It's also a fascinating artifact of late 80s futurism, half prophetic, half delightfully misguided. As we begin this journey, imagine the tape recorder clicking on, the whir of reels spinning backward and forward in time. We're stepping into the story of how Back to the Future Part 2 attempted the impossible, creating a sequel worthy of one of Hollywood's most beloved adventures, while juggling alternate realities, multiple versions of every character, and an increasingly stressed production team trying to figure out how to show 2 Michael J. Foxes in the same shot. This is the nerd history of Back to the Future Part 2. Back to the Future was a well-oiled DeLorean careening smoothly down a suburban street. Part 2 was, well, still a DeLorean, but this time someone had bolted 3 new engines onto the back and hoped for the best. The sequel began not with a clean slate, but with a cliffhanger, the ending of the first film. Doc swooping in wearing a mysterious future outfit, insisting Marty and Jennifer must go back to the future, had been added late in production as a playful tease rather than a contractual promise. But audiences loved it. Universal loved it. Suddenly, director Robert Zemeckis and writer Bob Gale had to answer the question, okay, but what actually happens in the future? Cue the caffeine. One of the boldest decisions was to make not 1, but 2 sequels at once. Filming parts 2 and 3 back-to-back was partly a creative choice and partly an act of survival. Zemeckis famously said he didn't want to spend another 5 years living in Back to the Future land. This overlapping production schedule meant actors were being whisked between Hill Valley 2015, a dystopian 1985, and the Old West all within weeks. An experience likened by cast members to time travel in its own right. Michael J. Fox was asked to play not only Marty McFly, but Marty's son, Marty's daughter, and multiple versions of future and past Marty. The filmmakers leaned heavily on cutting-edge motion-controlled cameras to pull these scenes off. These rigs could replicate the camera's path with machine precision, allowing Fox to perform the same scene in multiple positions that were later stitched together. At the time, the technology was so advanced that the crew joked the cameras were more punctual than some of the actors. Behind the scenes, not everything was smooth cruising at 88 miles per hour. Crispin Glover, who played George McFly, did not return for the sequels, leading to rewrites and some inventive stunt casting. The production used another actor in prosthetics for George's brief appearances and incorporated upside-down shots to help mask the change. The decision later sparked a famous lawsuit that reshaped Hollywood's rules about using an actor's likeness, one of the film's most unintended legacies. Part 2 pushed effects studios to the brink. Industrial Light and Magic conjured flying cars, expandable jackets, and holographic billboards, using a clever mix of optical compositing, miniatures, and emerging digital wizardry. Though modern audiences might spot a seam or two, the film represented a massive leap forward in visual effects and quite literally changed what audiences expected from cinematic futures. And here's a fun bit of production trivia. Robert Zemeckis was directing Part 2 by day and simultaneously finishing Who Framed Roger Rabbit by night. This meant he was routinely pulling 20-hour days and sleeping in short bursts. It's a minor miracle the man didn't start hallucinating cartoon DeLoreans. If cinematic time travel has taught us anything, it's that the future is usually less a prediction and more a mirror held up to the era imagining it. And Back to the Future Part 2 offers perhaps the most charmingly 80s mirror ever tilted toward the 21st century. A place where technology advances at breakneck speed, corporate logos glow like radioactive billboards, and fashion is aggressively shiny. The film's version of 2015 greets Marty and Doc with airborne traffic lanes stacked like pancakes, a world where parallel parking is a quaint relic. This vision springs from 1980s confidence and technological acceleration. If we got the microchip and the Walkman in one decade, surely the next 30 years would give us flying sedans. The production team leaned into retro-futurism, designing a skyline that looked like Blade Runner's cheerful cousin, right down to the holographic marketing predators leaping out at pedestrians. And the hoverboard. Perhaps the most beloved fictional product never mass-produced, unless you count those wheeled hoverboards that only hover in spirit and in no other measurable way. The idea was simple. Take the skateboard, a cultural icon of the decade, and imagine its natural evolution once we conquer gravity. To create the effect, the crew used rigs, wires, and clever set tricks, then swore in interviews, with straight faces, that the boards were real but too dangerous for the public. This deadpan joke worked a little too well. Toy stores were inundated with calls from kids demanding hoverboards, parents demanding answers, and Mattel presumably wondering why they were being blamed for not inventing anti-gravity. The costume designers unleashed a future where clothes inflate, shrink, self-dry, and self-lace at the touch of a button. Marty's self-adjusting jacket is a minor miracle of puppetry, and the Nike high tops, complete with power laces, became a holy grail for sneakerheads. Decades later, Nike would indeed produce a limited charity-focused version of the shoes, proving that sometimes life imitates art when marketing departments are sufficiently motivated. Marty's future home is an Aladdin's cave of blinking gadgets. It's a place where a giant screen TV lives in every wall, where video calls are routine, where biometric ID is standard, and where fruit descends from the ceiling in mechanical bowls like the world's least practical chandelier. The film even predicts a certain degree of smart home automation, though its vision leans more toward busy control panels than sleek touchscreens. What's most endearing about the 2015 of Back to the Future Part 2 isn't its accuracy, or lack thereof, but its optimism. Even the chaotic bits, oversized holograms, fashion disasters, and runaway hoverboard gangs, feel like symptoms of a society having too much fun with its inventions. It's a future imagined with a grin. If the future of 2015 was all neon optimism and levitating toys, the alternate 1985 is its grimy, leather-clad counterpart, a vision of what happens when one small sports almanac kickstarts a butterfly effect big enough to swan dive off the clock tower. In Back to the Future Part 2, this dark detour is more than a plot twist. It's a cautionary fable wrapped in a funhouse mirror version of Hill Valley. The Dystopian 1985 springs from Biff Tannen's acquisition of the 2015 Sports Almanac, a gift from his future self, and the narrative equivalent of giving a hyena the keys to a butcher shop. By betting his way to astronomical wealth, Biff reshapes the town, the economy, and most unsettlingly, the McFly family itself. The film makes the point with ruthless swiftness. A billionaire Biff doesn't just win, he rewrites morality in his own image. The idyllic American town introduced in the first film becomes a wasteland swallowed by crime, greed, and towering neon signs shouting Biff's cultural supremacy. Casinos replace courts, law enforcement appears overwhelmed, and even the high school has gone delinquent. The art direction leans heavily on exaggerated noir tropes, graffiti, boarded windows, and a distinctly oppressive color palette. It's a portrait of decay that stands in stark contrast to the technological sparkle of 2015. At the heart of this twisted reality stands the Biff Tannen Pleasure Paradise, a gaudy casino hotel that looks as if Vegas and a Bond villain lair had an argument and merged out of spite. Inside, we find Biff himself, sporting a wardrobe of villainous luxury and living a lifestyle enabled by exploitation masquerading as success. The film doesn't moralize overtly, but the visual storytelling leaves no ambiguity. Unchecked power corrodes everything around it. For Marty, this timeline is a waking nightmare. His neighborhood has collapsed into chaos, his father has been murdered, and his mother is trapped in a manipulative marriage to a man she despises. The film navigates this material carefully. It's still a family adventure after all, but it doesn't shy away from showing the human cost of an altered timeline. Here, the stakes of time travel are no longer theoretical, they're painfully personal. There is, however, a flicker of brightness. In this dark 1985, Doc Brown's house, converted into a refuge of invention and eccentricity, remains an anchor of sanity. It's a nice moment that subtly highlights Doc's moral compass. Even in the worst of timelines, he's still working, still tinkering, still striving to do good. And to his credit, his inventions appear largely unburned. Narratively, the alternate 1985 is a story's point of no return, the dramatic fulcrum that forces Marty and Doc to reckon with the consequences of their own adventures. It turns time travel from a whimsical ride into a responsibility, and in terms of tone, it gives the film a darker middle act that heightens the thrill of the eventual restoration. Time travel in Back to the Future Part 2 isn't merely a plot device. It's an entire ecosystem of rules, loopholes, paradoxes, and enough whiteboard logic to make a physicist gently set down their coffee and say, "I have questions." But for the purposes of cinematic storytelling, the series leans on a surprisingly sturdy framework, one that becomes especially intricate in the second film. Let's step into Doc Brown's mental chalkboard. The trilogy's foundational premise is that time is malleable. Alter one key event, and the timeline branches into a new reality with its own consequences. The alternate 1985 is the most dramatic example. Old Biff's meddling in 1955 doesn't alter the original timeline, it creates an entirely new one. And crucially, Marty and Doc land in that reality, because the DeLorean locks onto the timeline in which the destination period exists. This is the franchise's clearest rule. Time travel doesn't overwrite the original timeline, it creates a new one, and travel follows the new branch. It's also one of the most elegant ways to avoid paradoxes, theoretically. Part 2 is packed with duplicates, 2 Martys, 2 Biffs, 2 Docs, sometimes all operating within minutes of each other. The rule is simple but dangerous. Multiple versions of the same person can coexist as long as they don't make direct contact. The risk, Doc warns, is a temporal paradox that would destroy the universe. Or it could just destroy that person, hard to predict. Science? Maybe not. Dramatic? Absolutely. This rule gives us one of the film's great joys, watching Marty navigate 1955 while carefully avoiding his other self from the first movie. Changes take time to propagate. An idea hinted at in the first film, but much more visible in Part 2. Marty's siblings fading from a photograph is a classic example from the original. In Part 2, Marty and Doc return to 1985 without first realizing it's the wrong 1985. The timeline hasn't snapped into place for them yet because they didn't live through the branching point. In other words, time travelers don't retroactively experience the consequences of timeline changes until they return to their own present. This allows for dramatic reveals, like the dystopian Hill Valley surprise waiting at home. Here's where the film gets philosophical in a charmingly Doc Brown way. Doc insists the future hasn't happened yet, so it can be changed. This contradiction is resolved with a single narrative principle. The future can be changed, but only if time travelers intervene before a given event becomes locked into their personal timeline. Thus, Marty can prevent becoming a failed musician, avoid the car accident incident, and spare his future kids from disaster. But once a traveler enters a new branch, that branch becomes their reality. Time in Back to the Future treats personal experience as the anchor. Your present is wherever you're standing, and your actions determine which branch you follow. A bit messy, sure, but dramatically satisfying. The Sports Almanac storyline dramatizes the central tension of all time travel fiction. If knowledge is power, then future knowledge is infinite power. Give it to the wrong person, Biff, and the result is disaster. Give it to the right person, Marty, and the film avoids letting him exploit it, because the moral isn't win big on the ponies, but rather choices matter more than shortcuts. It's a character rule disguised as a temporal rule. Even when the logic gets fuzzy, the series maintains a crucial internal consistency. Actions have consequences. Cause and effect always matters, even when scrambled across decades. And Part 2, more than any other entry in the series, revels in showing the machinery of time travel up close, rewinding, replaying, and reshaping events like a cosmic editor splicing film. Some films leave a mark. Back to the Future Part 2 left a hoverboard-shaped crater in the collective imagination. Though the original film often gets the lion's share of reverence, the sequel became the myth engine, the entry that reshaped how an entire generation thought about technology, the future, and the deliciously maddening possibilities of time travel. Let's glide, hoverboard optional, into its legacy. For decades, the year 2015 wasn't just a number on a calendar. It was the benchmark for futurism. Journalists, tech companies, fans, and bored office workers all spent the mid-2010s comparing reality with the film's predictions. Flying cars? Still grounded. Self-drying jackets? Waiting. Hoverboards? Sort of, if you tilt your head and squint a little. But the charming truth emerged. The film shaped our expectations as much as, or more than, it predicted them. Sneaker culture erupted when Nike's self-lacing mags finally became real, released in limited charity auctions, prompting sneakerheads worldwide to shed quiet, reverent tears. Smart glasses, video calls, fingerprint locks, and giant multi-channel screens all became mainstream, echoing ideas the movie tossed out with casual 1989 swagger. If there is a single prop more iconic than the DeLorean itself, it might be the hoverboard. Its pop cultural aftershocks were enormous. Skaters treated it like a holy grail. Kids demanded them for Christmas for decades. Magicians, tinkerers, and futurists attempted prototypes, some using electromagnets, others using sheer stubbornness. Even when hoverboards, quote-unquote, with wheels, became a fad, the name endured because Back to the Future Part 2 defined it. The film didn't just imagine a toy, it minted a permanent symbol of the future. Part 2 also popularized an entire mode of sci-fi storytelling, revisiting earlier scenes from new angles. Its 1955 on 1955 structure was groundbreaking, a kind of cinematic recursion that later inspired films like Avengers Endgame, where characters also sneak around past events trying not to bump into their earlier selves. The trick felt clever, nostalgic, and meta before meta was a marketing term. The film's future is the kind of future only the 80s could dream up. Bold, neon, gadget-heavy, that retro-futuristic aesthetic became a cultural touchstone, influencing everything from fashion editorials to synthwave album covers to theme park rides. It helps cement the idea that futures can be playful, not just dystopian. Even its comedic beats, fax machines everywhere, became beloved memes, especially once reality leapt past those technologies and left them rusting behind. Before multiverses were the superhero genre's default setting, Back to the Future Part 2 gave the public a crash course in branching realities. It didn't use quantum jargon, it didn't need to. Instead, it made the concept intuitive. Change one thing, get a new world. This becomes foundational for countless shows, films, and comic arcs that followed. And despite Ant-Man's conclusion in Endgame, Back to the Future is not a bunch of BS. Endgame largely follows the exact same rules of time travel. Ultimately, Part 2 became one of the rare sequels whose influence radiates beyond the franchise itself. It shaped how we think about the near future, personal technology, alternate timelines, recursive storytelling, and of course, the eternal disappointment of gravity. It's not just a movie, it's a reference point, one invoked whenever we dream, joke, or speculate about what tomorrow might hold. And so we coast back to our own timeline, the DeLorean humming as it eases beneath the speed limit, its flux capacitor cooling from another adventure well won. Back to the Future Part 2 remains a rare breed of sequel, daring, chaotic, ambitious, and endlessly quotable. It gave us hoverboards that never were, timelines that bent like pretzels, and a vision of the future so delightfully bold that even its inaccuracies became part of its charm. More than that, it expanded the universe of Hill Valley into something richer and stranger, a place where past and future dance, collide, and occasionally yell at each other across rooftops. Through its wild structure and inventive effects, it invited viewers to imagine themselves as stewards of their own timelines, shaping tomorrow not by almanacs or accidents, but by choices. As we close the documentary reel, the whir of tape slows, the final click echoes, and we step back into our own world, one where the future may not have flying cars, but it still holds plenty of wonder, because the future is what you make of it. So make it a good one. Thank you for joining me for the Nerd History of Back to the Future Part 2. This is how the Nerd History Podcast is going to go moving forward. We have rebranded to Nerd History Documentaries, and we'll be leaning more heavily on our documentary content. Currently, we're shooting for one a month. We might be able to sneak a few more in here or there. That's about all the bandwidth that we have at the moment, but we are trying to put as much love and care into these as we can. And occasionally, my wife will join me for a special discussion episode that we will add as a bonus here and there, or maybe I'll have a few other guests on, too, to discuss specific nerdy topics. But for now, thank you so much for listening. We hope you will continue listening, audio versions on Spotify or your favorite podcast app, or right here on YouTube. I am Radio Matt. We are a proud part of the LTN Podcast Network, and remember, Jesus loves you, nerds.